Hello again, St. John Baptist Church. This is Al McClaney with the weekly stewardship video. I want to handle a question that was inspired by our own brother Thurman Sneed. Thank you, Thurman, for inspiring this. He posed a question while we were on a leadership meeting of the St. John Master Men's Ministry that's led by our own brother Greg Newby, who's doing a great job. And I also like to take a moment, as my dad would say, a personal privilege. Brothers, if you have not joined us in the ministry, please do so. We're doing a lot of projects, a lot of things for the kingdom, even though it's in the pandemic, but we're still moving forward in the ministry. So Brother Thurman Sneed said, I would love to tell my younger self some things I know now about finances. So I put the question together, what would I tell my 18 or younger year old self about finances? And I pondered this question and I thought to myself, two main areas, and they revolve around scripture. And before we get too deep, as always, a disclaimer, no advice should be seen as a recommendation, as I'm not a licensed financial advisor and is for educational purposes only. So the first is foundational, and I've gone over this before. That's recognizing God's sovereignty. God owns everything. From Psalm 24:1 in the Amplified Bible, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness of it, the world and those who dwell in it. That's where we start, because that will drive everything. If God is in the center, then off of that, you'll do the actions such as prayer, generosity, reading the Bible and the scripture, and following those scriptures when it comes to your finances. Because as I've referenced before, there are over 2,000 scriptures related to money, finance, and possessions. The second one that would drive out of this, because this is scripture and God owns it all, and I think a scripture that has been a source of any success I've had, is steady plotting principle. And that's from Proverbs 21:5 in the Living Bible. Steady plotting brings prosperity. Hasty speculation brings poverty. That same scripture in the Amplified Bible says, the plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance and advantage, but everyone who acts in haste comes surely to poverty. So how would you use this question? I would say to yourself, what would I tell my 18-year-old or younger self about finances, and utilize that to teach someone else? Or you can also or use it to reinforce what you're currently doing. Maybe you stopped doing it and need to go back to doing that, or start doing something, because as we get older, hopefully knowledge and experience will help us in being successful. So that's how I would pose and challenge you to ask yourself that question. So further details, I've got a picture here of what I call the Masters Club. And this is a picture of my graduation from Amerton University when I received my master's in business administration. And I call this the welcoming to me to the Masters Club, because these are my family members who already had their master's degree. My father here to the far left, Alfonso McClaney, my wife Janine, who graduated from Amerton also with her master's degree. There's my mom, who passed away, is now with the Lord. She got her master's in education, and my mother was Betty McClaney, and my mother-in-law, Wilma Robinson, has her master's in social work. And I look back on, it took me several years, but it was steadiness. It was diligence. And you can see there's some commentary I got from a Bible commentary. Diligence, while as opposed to laziness, is opposed also to rashness, to premature and inconsiderate haste. The diligent man first plans, then acts. He proceeds thoughtfully and systematically. Diligence can affect little unless accompanied with careful forethought. Diligence means steady perseverance in execution. So ready, steady, go. And one of my mentors, who was one of my leaders, talked about his daughter who got a PhD. And I was very impressed. I'm like, she must really be smart. And what he said was, she is smart, but the more important things when going through a PhD program is just steadiness, just persevering, just keeping at it, even if it's piece by piece. The other part of that scripture in 21:5 says, haste brings poverty. But of everyone that is hasty only to want, that is, haste to be rich, and is resolved to be so, right or wrong, he comes at last to poverty and want. Or he who is rash and precipitate in acting, who never thinks before he acts, but rashly engages in an affair, or however does not give himself time enough to think it over, but as soon as it has entered his thoughts, he immediately attempts to put it in execution. A man so thoughtless and inconsiderate, so rash and hasty, brings himself and family to poverty. And I talk about, hastiness in life. That could be debt. Instead of waiting to save for an item, we just go into debt immediately. We want the immediate gratification. Or get rich quick schemes. A lot of people have come across fraudulent situations because it was a scheme that took their money and they were looking at get rich quick versus steady plotting or steady movement towards savings. So I would say those two scriptures would be what I would tell my 18-year-old self, or even younger, because we know you don't have to be 18, even younger, that you start learning these biblical principles, the better. So let's take a look at this week's earnings that will be coming out. As I've always said, earnings drives the market. And so if you want to look for this slide or subscribe to it, there's the web address. But this week, we've got a lot of companies in the consumer area. And we're going to talk about those later as I'm going to give you a list of some companies that you could possibly think about as something in the future to invest in. But we've got Walmart, Home Depot, Lowe's, Target. You can see heavy in the consumer area. You've got Ross. There's John Deere out here, Foot Locker. So next week could be interesting when it comes to kind of judging where the economy is when it comes to consumer, because we've got a lot of consumer type companies that are reporting next week. And speaking of that, I wanted to take a look at the economy. And we looked at this a couple of months ago where I was using two indicators, and one was traffic patterns on the website, and I gave you the website TomTom, where you could compare traffic patterns. And then there was also the TSA checkpoints or travel points. So I'm going to first look at TomTom, and this is the Dallas-Fort Worth area where we're located. And this is a comparison to last year around the same time. That's the dotted line. That's the traffic and congestion. And this was the last 7 days. And then the red is currently. So live congestion, previous week's congestion. It's comparing the two. And so you can see the average congestion in 2019, we're up here. And you can see my cursor is tracing it over. All right. And you can see, of course, doing certain times a day that would have been traditionally known as rush hour. Of course, it would peak. You can see we're still not near. We're getting closer to it, but it's still a lot of room. Now, a couple of factors could be people are out of work, not as many people on the road. And then there are a lot of companies that have said they're going to have people work from home. So that could be impacting. And I'm going to talk about that later, maybe the long-term effects of people working from home. Here's another indicator looking at the TSA checkpoint travel numbers, those going through the transportation and security. So you can see this is last year, over 2 million travelers on average going through TSA checkpoint. The last number I have, the 13th, there were 761,821 travelers going through TSA on August 13th compared to over 2 million. And you can see it was pretty steady. The numbers are still not even close to last year's numbers. So let's put it in perspective on, have we gotten better? So remember these numbers, 700 some thousand, 500 some thousand. Let's look at July. So around the 4th of July weekend, 3rd, 4th, 5th, that time frame, which we know traditionally is a larger travel days, one of the large travel days um, that we have, and this was around a weekend. And so you can see we did push up to 755 on the July 2nd, 764. Still nothing in comparison to where on July 6th of last year, 2,748,000 some travelers. So this affects, of course, the airlines industry, travel industry, and it could be a lot of people still not traveling. So those are two indicators that are, how close are we to this economy coming back to norm? So we know we still have a lot of room for improvement. So I posed the question, some companies have decided that people are going to work permanently from home. Google announced, I think, into at least July of next year. I think Visa said the same thing. And then some companies are saying, we're not coming back. We're going to have employees, the bulk of our employees working from home. So I wanted to pose this question. What are some industries / companies that could continue to profit doing this new norm? Or what are some industries or companies that could recover for big profits? So again, I want to read off the disclaimer because I am mentioning a lot of companies and industries here. So no advice should be seen as recommendations, as I'm not a licensed financial advisor, and this is for educational purposes only. So here's some companies that I've just thought of and some industries that you may look at. Some are ones that are doing well now and will probably most likely continue to do well during the pandemic. Some that have been beaten up and may recover. All of these, you're going to still need to think of steady plotting, which is the scripture I said that I would have told my 18-year-old younger self to really catch hold of. So here are kind of industries, and here are some companies. So when you talk about remote work and stay home, Zoom, Netflix, Slack is the company on the symbol of work, Peloton, Papa John's. I heard somebody say, man, I've ordered so many pizzas now since I've been working from home. That could be an area you can think about. Consumer products. And we saw where Walmart and Target were reporting this week, a lot of things that people are buying are because of the pandemic. Clorox is a company back that you wouldn't have thought of would have been rising the way it is, but because of all the cleaning products. People are not eating out as much, so Kroger and Dollar Tree, and then pets. People are spending a lot of money on our pets. I know our newest family member, Deuce, we seem to do everything for that dog. And so we're the example of probably the average family. So that could be an area that you may think of in investing. E-commerce has become big. Shopify, Amazon, Wayfair, Etsy, all of these are e-commerce giants that are doing well. Home Depot and Lowe's, a lot of people are doing home products. Tech, as we've seen in QQQ, we'll see later when I show the chart, this has been leading us. This particular here, also known as AMD, Advanced Micro Devices, this is a chip industry that's been doing very well. Health and biotech, of course, that's around the health concerns that we have, and also the race to a vaccine. So companies like Moderna and Gilead. And then Teladoc is where physicians and patients are meeting online and having online calls or meetups. So that's one you may consider. Now here's one that some of it has been beaten up. The airlines, and that would have been related to the TSA checkpoints, the cruise industry and energy, oil. So those may be ones that you're looking at could recover for big products. And you may want to, if you do that, you want to be patient. Now there has been a bump lately in like Royal Caribbean, Norwegian, as people are probably thinking the same thing. They've been beaten up so bad, I'm just going to invest in them. But if you're going to do that, you're going to have to be patient because it may take years for those to fully recover. UPS and FedEx have still been doing well as people are doing more and more deliveries to their home as they're at home. The other thing you may think of is defensive. And when we get into the charts, some people are starting to say, okay, are we overheating now? Because we know from looking at the previous slides I showed you, the economy still hadn't fully recovered. The unemployment lines are still long. The people filing for unemployment, even though we got the report this past Friday, I think Thursday or Friday, where it was lower new claims, but still many people still out of work. So you may be thinking defensive. Gold has been on a tear. Silver has been on a tear. You may be looking at going into bonds or utilities. These are traditionally known as defensive. As the economy gets bad, then people sometimes run to those. So again, I want to read the disclaimer because I gave a lot of companies, a lot of industries. No advice should be seen as a recommendation, as I'm not a licensed financial advisor, and it's for educational purposes only, and you want to do your own research. So a lot of these, you can do research by reviewing some of the tools that I provided. On July 26th and August 2nd, there was a video on exchange traded funds, ETFs, and I gave you the resource called ETFDB, where you can kind of crack over on those exchange traded funds and see what companies are in there that could be potential for you to invest in. And then you may want to review July 18th, where we talked about mutual funds. Those can be substitutes for the individual stock, because some of these stocks are pricey right now. So you may want to go through an ETF. Look for the company that you want exposure. For instance, I want to do Amazon, but I can't avoid Amazon's almost $3,000. I think it's the last price on it, or Tesla, which you'll notice I listed as a tech company, even though it's cars, but they're doing so much more now when it comes to battery storage. And Tesla's pushing like close to $1,700 a share. But you may be able to go to, for instance, a Robinhood and look at fractional shares, or to a Charles Schwab. They've been advertising stock slices, and these are a fraction, if you will, of the cost. But of course, it's not the full probably if you will, when that stock moves, but it's a way of participating in a high price class, in a high price stock at a lower cost. So we'll end with the charts as we always look at. Here's SPY, and this is the exchange traded fund, or ETF, of the top 500 companies, or the largest 500 companies in Standard & Poor's. I've redrew the lines because we've now moved so far away. So I looked at this low and this high, and you can see right now we're bumping up, which could be what we call resistance, and this could be acting as around support. And the next move could be up here, and I can't see what the number is, but that could be, if it goes through that resistance, it could go to that, move up to that price point. That's 346.83. I think that's what that is. So that's the Standard & Poor's. QQQ, which is tech, I've redrawn those lines. As you can see, this has been bouncing off, and these are daily moves off the $254.75, kind of bouncing off. So that's probably a good support line. And then it went up, and this may start to act as resistance. We don't know. The $275.21, if it gets through that, it may go to 284.86, so it'll move for it. So we may bounce around in this area for several days or even weeks. So this lends itself to a couple of people that I've been listening to, that they feel, you know, we may be getting a little extended, that there could be a pullback, as we've seen before when these happen. All right, those are the pullbacks. Went up, pulled back. We ended on Friday with some selling, but still about the same. So you may be looking at those defensive areas that I talked about. So let's end. I want to end with two reminders. And what made me think of these is I was listening to a State of Black America, which is, you can do probably a Google search, and they did a virtual of it, and it was the former mayor of New Orleans, Mark Morial, who kind of hosted it, and they do it every year. Now lately they've been doing it virtual, and one of the people talked about is make sure that we not only vote, because every vote counts, but make sure you complete the census. And this is a number he gave that kind of woke me up, and said census numbers determine $675 billion in government money, $675 billion based on those census numbers. So I just wanted to put a reminder out. We're less than 80 days, of course, from election. That's important, but just as important is to complete the census. And so until next week, I wanted to make sure that while we are seeing a lot of great numbers in the market, be careful. And also going back to asking yourself that question, what would I want to tell my 18-year-old or 15-year-old or 14-year-old self regarding finances? What have I learned?